All right, guys. Anthony here with Austin Struggle Weapons Guild, going over one more thing with Sword and Buckler. I was asked about the Priest Special Second, which is kind of seen at the end of the manuscript of the treatise, and what that means, what it does, and how to kind of apply it. So, first things first, we can talk a little bit about Schutzen, which is something I've kind of ignored, kind of glossed over, but to really start to understand the why of Free Special Second, how it works, and what we're kind of gaining from that position. We'll talk about Schutzen a little bit. Schutzen, and the version I have, I've been going off the Joy Native translation of 133, which is a free PDF available to grab and download, read through, look at. I'm cheap and lazy, and it's really helpful. I really enjoy the translation, and it lets me look at the manuscript because it's a more literal translation, at least my understanding of it. It lets me look at it and kind of interpret things a little bit more without having someone else's influence, whether good or bad. So I haven't looked at other translations to have opinions on that. So I'm definitely not saying other translations aren't any good. That's what I have. It was accessible to me when I started, and I just haven't bothered to improve since then. So to say I have a Schutzen, there's a nice glossary at the front of this translation. As I said, it's described as a motion and action that covers a line and kind of threatens your opponent. And it's to show as these positions, the siege of second, siege of third, we talked about these positions here are called the Schutzens. And this kind of idea that I'm setting up to control and displace from the position I'm driving from. So Schutzen is described early on as a ward. At the end of the book, early on as a siege. And at the end of the book here, they talk about it as being something the person from the ward is going to do to kind of close that line off and react from. So kind of quick review recap to tie everything back together. So we know siege or second ward is here outside your dominant shoulder. The buckler is shown pressed forward, pressed out, right? I want this extended forward, driving this line, moving through. The counter to siege of second, the Schutzen that they show to enter from second is kind of displaced out here under the assumption that it's going to be able to press through, control, working from there. Same thing. Third is over here, the extended buckler. Siege of third is over here, driving this down, controlling these things. And these Schutzens are sort of used to control lines, close off angle, close off attacks before the attacker shows there and gets there. So we're kind of preemptively setting up. I can either close this line as soon as it comes in. I'm sieging with this Schutzen here. So as the attack comes in, as I siege second, I'm able to close off that line before it gets there. So I'm kind of preempting, saying, yes, go ahead, make that attack. This line is easily closed off. You can even start looking at the Schutzen as being just pressing out this way. But I just like that because it starts putting things in targets and things like that. But this idea of closing a line, protecting a line is important. So following off from that, going into those last couple pages of the effect book, where we see Walpurgis in the pre-special second. So pre-special second is shown far more upright. She doesn't have the same kind of lean, or even that lean with this foot forward like this, that we see early in the book. Walpurgis sieging in is very upright. Notably, the buckler is held tight, and the siege of second here is kind of tucked back. It's very refused, very set back, and not giving distance, not giving length, not giving up that space and tempo. And that should sound familiar because that's something we talked about with free special long point. Right, so free special long point, if long point is down, out, something like this, that priest long point was refused up against the front leg so it can come out and drive through. It's a very similar motion. So instead of being down and ready to extend out to long point, we're now tucked back, ready to control, react, kind of move from there. So that's the first half of this puzzle, right? Of what is this position, what are we doing with it, what are we gaining from it? Well, just like with free special long point, which again, a special siege, that I'm going to come here, sword is draped over that front leg, and I'm able to come up, close lines, pick where I'm going, but I'm always reacting to what my opponent is giving to me if they give me anything at all. And if they don't, I can drive in the structure and power to control and decide what's going on. But instead of using my weapon to manipulate and work against, telling them which line I'm going to take and which line they need to protect themselves against, here, all my options are still open. I can do whatever I need to do in the moment to make something happen. So that's the first part, using this kind of contracted reset position. The second half is something, and I'm not going to promise they don't talk about earlier in the book, but kind of said, they said, oh yeah, by the way, the guy they're sieging, because they show the person being opposed in first, is they just go to this kind of position here, where they're saying, okay, you're coming from this shoulder, you're coming from this right side, you're probably throwing this cut. Because I'm in first, I'm just going to come up here like this and get ready to close that off. Let me see if I can get my arm up at the right angle. That's kind of what the picture shows, where that elbow is super high, super bent from this first position here. And now I'm in a great position if someone's attacking with this guard. This is me similar to our fiddle bow, which is underneath, right? Here, and I can set this aside, drive this through. Notice this hand is protected by a buckler. That's why it's there. This hand is nice up and away and protected. And there's nothing you're going to get from second. If you're sieging me for this attack, right, even though I'm in first, and we kind of talk about these strikes or these strikes, if I'm in a defensive position, I can start looking at these Schutzens and closing these lines actively. And again, not using our footwork, we're not driving in like this. Because notice this gets me way too close and this arm's exposed. If I step back, I can be here. If I switch my feet, same thing starts to, same thing, right? I can cover that line, make that attack irrelevant, and let them tell me what's going to happen before I have to commit. And this is where that pre-second comes into play. So in pre-second, at the end of the book, they kind of show they're here. Actor one is here, right? Walpurgis. And then they have the other side respond, and they're in first ward, and they kind of go to this weird, awkward, high elbow position, which again, you can start seeing, if I'm just pulling this up and moving, I can close this line. If I want to, step out with that thrust, I can cut around. It's got a lot of options from this. What looks like an awkward position, but again, this is a Schutzen. It's something where we're closing a line, we're addressing attack. Again, the glossary talks about being part of a siege, but I think it's kind of that ancillary position you kind of move through to find out what's really happening and what you need to do. And this is why the pre-second works against it. Because if I'm coming up here like this, because I haven't sieged in, I can now react and press down overbind and control. This angle's not super helpful, but I'm not really able to get that position out of my little pel here. Let me see if I try the other side, if that does anything better for me. A little bit high, but we'll kind of work with it, right? So, right, so again, so you can see sword here. Maybe you can see the sword there. I don't know. So this shoots in this kind of this high up position, and you can see the sword's a little bit more on point, a little bit flatter than this guard's going to be, but it'll work just the same. So this pre-second, even though it's a pre-second ward, they're using it as a siege. So I'm coming from wherever I want to start into. I come into my siege, and the nice thing about this, I can just collapse. If this buckler is forward, I step into this, I collapse to my buckler, and now I can kind of do what I need to do, right? That's what we've always talked about with the sieges, right? They're these positions where I get to decide what happens next. I'm in control of the fight. I'm taking charge. So if we imagine our friends in first, so their buckler, their sword's gonna be over here, right? That side. I'm gonna siege in. They see me coming close, so they just raise up their buckler, raise up their sword, hide, covering this line because they expect the strike to come from there. Maybe I can angle my pel a little bit to help simulate that. The reason I was going to do this one. So right, so they're in first. I'm my 2 steps away. I come into my siege here. They come up against that, and this is where I get to just press down and control and drive down. And it should be, at this point, I hope no surprise at all. I'm going to catch drive down into 7th so I can Schultz lock and nook in and follow through. So I know this is a kind of cat-scrambling mess, but this is a very difficult concept to try to explain, especially with just Appel as a training partner for right now. So I'm going to try to explain it one more time, rehash everything from the top. So pre-special second, even though it's a ward, or we think of it as a ward because second ward is a ward, this is being treated as a siege. This is not a position where I start out at distance like this, tucked and back, where I'm one step away and driving through. This should be a position I'm moving to like we would half shield, right? If I go to half shield to make my thrust, likewise, I'd come to pre-second and then make whatever motion I want. And you can do this again from any of these positions. You can go from second to pre-second, right? And if you start doing that, especially start really creating this illusion that you're making a strike, that you're making an attack. So I'm here, I'm driving, and my sword comes up, but I'm stopping it. From the other side, you kind of see the same thing, right? So I'm in second ward. I siege to pre-second here and drive through. And just really making this motion starts to, again, make this idea that I'm coming with this strike. I'm coming there not to try to hit, but to close the line, to place the point in front, something they need to react, something they need to control. Because again, we're starting these motions 2 steps away, 1 step in a swing, shouldn't be close enough to hit the other person, but I can take that step, go out here, drive the point in, right, to be a siege to long point, something like that. So this is telegraphing I'm really coming with this strike, except it stops. And that lets me redirect my bind, redirect recontrol, and kind of choose where the fight goes. The corollary piece of this is really getting those Schützens and those ideas of closing those lines. And I kind of hand waved this earlier about making these cuts from my wards, right? I can do these cuts, do this cut, right? But these closed off positions, these static positions, these Schützens are kind of the other half of that piece, right? So yes, I can cut from my wards, but I can also close these positions off like this and start making those positions work for me without taking that step. So I hope that made some kind of sense. I know someone asked about getting into this position. What does it mean? What does it do? And how does it help? So hopefully this was somewhere in there helpful, somewhere in there useful. If there are questions, please feel free, email, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. Otherwise, have a good night. I'll probably, by request again, start doing Leknitzer and digging some of that. I'll see if I can get a partner that's not Appel for some of those. So we'll see what happens. I have ready for Monday. Otherwise, I'll be back later this week, and enjoy your night. Thank you.